Education and Business Committee meeting, April 14th, 2026. I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the lands of the Halkinian speaking people, specifically the Quamitchin Village. The Board of Education is honored to be able to collaboratively walk beside the Cowichan, Malahats, Bassett, Malakits, Manus, and Laxon peoples who have cared for this land for thousands of years. May we walk gently on the unceded territories of their land as we work together to lift up all of the Husnian. Motion to adopt the agenda, please. Trustee Schmidt, Trustee Souza, all in favor. Motion carried. Business and Operations 2026-2027 annual budget. Mr. Sandquist.
Thank you. I'm just, I think our Zoom link may have dropped off the screen. I have to click the Zoom down at the bottom of the blue box, and if that'll bring it up. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share my presentation that you have received in advance. That came out on Saturday morning and in your package combination. And it should just be coming up here on the screen. On your desktops are further details on the recommendations that we'll get to. This is a format that trustees are familiar with, where we create notes with additional details, and we do this as sometimes we're talking about very specific positions, and we don't want to do that in a public realm, but you have that information in front of you. So we are here to review early stages of the 2026-2027 annual budget, focusing mainly on the operating budget and a couple of special purpose funds today. And as is usual, we come and ground ourselves in our budget guiding principles. And these were adopted earlier in the year. We adopted these in February after reviewing them at advisory in January. So these are here, and they are to, of course, align budget decisions with the strategic plan, develop the budget as a mechanism to aid in reconciliation, targeting funds to increase Indigenous student graduation rates, develop the budget on the principles of equity, be transparent. So we have had many meetings so far, and I'll talk about what's happened to date. And at the end of the process, we will also have a report, which we call the guided tour of the budget, which will basically detail for the public everything that has changed in the budget year over year. We want to account for economic uncertainties, and there certainly are many of those now. And as you saw earlier, we'd already built in some inflationary pieces for fuel and utilities. We need to comply with the School Act, collective agreements, regulatory requirements, and board policy. Multi-year. Next time I'm back, I'll bring a multi-year projection over the next 3 years for the board to understand the implications. Short-term, long-term priorities need to be balanced, and then, of course, the contingency balance, which is what I'll end with in this presentation. So we also focus on our priorities: learning, Indigenous ways of knowing, individual and collective well-being, and caring for place. And as we progress, we will align the options to these priorities for the board. Okay. So the board does have an administrative procedure, 412, which is to address periods of diminishing financial resources. And that is the position that the board's in. You've previously seen information on the grant, which is down by about $1.6 million from the previous year. And you've seen information on enrollment trends, which are showing that isn't expected to turn around anytime soon. Like the enrollment is dropping as there are fewer students coming in versus graduating. But when in a period of diminishing resources, the board follows two principles. That's to try to maintain the highest quality of education services and preserve the programs that the district deems indispensable, or add new programs which may become important. So under the new programs, the budget has recognized place-based program for next year, additional careers programming opportunities with Vancouver Island University that were previously going to be leaving the community, and the new tech program is included in the budget. And to provide the highest reasonable level of job security for staff is the second goal. And of course, when 90% of the budget is employees, that's challenging. I've given this budget a theme of managing declining student enrollment and resources as being the big challenge. We are starting to drop enrollment, and with that comes resources, and decisions need to be made. And we've already talked a little bit about this, how the grant this year, or the per pupil amount, hasn't had any inflationary adjustments to it. And that has been really the case for many, many years. So the boards have received salary-based inflation, not benefit-based inflation. So salaries that have been negotiated, but not the benefits and not the actual services and supply components of the budget, like utilities and fuel, etc. So those continue to go up in price and continue to pose challenges for boards. And here's what you have been up to so far. You established the budget guiding principles that we just reviewed. The board has held liaison meetings with the District Student Advisory Council. I attended the Indigenous Student Leadership Group and brought that feedback back to the board. Cowichan Valley Teachers Federation, United Steelworkers, Canadian Union of Public Employees, the Principal Vice Principals Association, and the District Parent Advisory Council. So lots of feedback from the partners. You issued a survey on the budget and got feedback through that mechanism. And you held a public meeting on the budget, although not well attended. There was feedback at that meeting. And then you have been receiving from staff at Board of Education and Business Committee meetings and board meetings additional information today. And very specifically, March 31st and April 7th, we did the same presentation to provide you a provincial perspective on the 3-year enrollment trends, which showed that Cowichan Valley School District is declining at a quicker rate than average in the province. We reviewed the ministry funding announcement, changes in operating revenues and changes in operating expenditures, and the assumptions used to create the opening budget position. And we did an updated surplus reconciliation based on the February 28th year-end projection. In this meeting, we're going to talk about some list of options. We're going to invite trustees to provide feedback and recommendations, and then review the 2 primary special purpose funds. And so when we came on March 31st and April 7th, we identified a budget shortfall of $4,339,271. And really, there were 3 main factors to that shortfall. One, the budget had been balanced on $2.6 million this year of surplus. So by taking that out as a starting position, that's money that has to be found again. Benefits for health had increased by close to $1 million, and then we had teacher salary increments of about $700,000, and that sort of adds up to that number. But we're making assumptions. So we are assuming that all potential future wage increases as a result of the collective bargaining agreement will be fully funded. So not only this year's, but next year's, the budget that we're building. We've not built any wages or any other revenue into the budget at this time, as the province hasn't given us that information. That our extended health and dental rates that were provided early will be the rates. That WorkSafe BC demerits won't continue to go up. And that the Bank of Canada will hold or slightly decrease interest rates over the course of the next year. We're still seeing stabilization in the international student program. That will be one of our recommendations here. And we've already made some adjustments to the budget. So we've adjusted classrooms for 165 FTE. So we've already taken teachers out. That would be equivalent to 165 FTE student. And we've done the same with the education assistants FTE. So there's a reduction of 33 student designations currently. So we have taken that down. That is almost 25 of those students are grade 12s graduating with H designations, and there's only one or two that come in kindergarten, so there's a big differential there that we received. And then put in $150,000 as the estimated cost of the municipalities conducting the school trustee election on behalf of boards. There's cost sharing arrangement that has to take place there. This is going to be new for the board. There is information on the ministry website on how school districts allocate their resources across the province. And what this is the provincial averages in each of the main functions. So a function is like instruction, which is everything in the classroom, teachers, EAs, that's careers, inclusive ed, Indigenous ed, all those pieces are in function 1 instruction. Function 4, district admin, that's you, the board, that's myself and the superintendent, and that's the board office basically. Function 5 is building maintenance, utilities, custodial, grounds maintenance, and technology falls under function 5. It's unique that they put it there, but the ministry has us categorize it there. And then function 7, transportation and housing. We don't have housing. There are some school districts that have housing. Capital would be money that's sort of put aside for, say white fleet or technology replacements out of your operating budget, and other maybe paying down debt. So this is the provincial numbers. And these are our numbers that are in the 25-26 budget. And I'll just move to the next slide and show you the comparison here. So, this is why we have local boards. The provincial numbers aren't necessarily reflecting a community's values. But I thought it was interesting to show you the difference between provincial averages and the school district and how that equates into dollars. So under instruction, which is the classroom, we have about a 1% difference. So we would spend $1,070,000 less than the provincial average on classrooms. On administration, which is the board and the board office, the SC79 would spend $325,000 less based on the provincial average. So that's a good number. On operations and maintenance, spend $464,000 more than the provincial average, but the big outlier is transportation, where the board spends $1.6 million more than provincial average, and really $1.3 million more than the funding that comes in through the various components in the formula. So that's an important distinction in this Cowichan Valley School District's budget versus the provincial averages. And under capital, this would be something that we're really going to need to address at some point in regards to things like white fleet and some equipment, and that can happen through property sales, in the future with some of the properties that the board have under consideration. So I thought this was really, I've never shown you this, and I never have been able to find this data before, but I thought it was interesting and this is why local boards exist, to make local decisions around these priorities. But it's interesting.
You want 2 questions? Trustee Souza, you can go first, and then Trustee Schmidt.
I'm just curious about the transportation number compared to the provincial. Why is it so? Is it because we're a large rural based what area?
Yeah, but we're actually not that large and rural. We only are with about 20 minutes of any school here. And so the data that the province has related to the funding doesn't suggest that we're as rural as everybody thinks. We're not that different than Comox or Campbell River or really Nanaimo or Pacific Rim. And there's funding, and I'll show you this at some point. It's not something that is addressable 3 months before the end of the school year if it's something the board will want to dive into. But I think everybody thinks it's because it's really rural. Certainly the board's going to spend more than Vancouver, who has public transportation, but they're also not going to receive any funding for that at the same time. But I've looked on the island and done a comparison of funding to service level, and it certainly is a lot higher in the Cowichan Valley. And I think it's just the nature of the service level that the board provides. You know, the walk limits, the out of catchment transportation being areas that some districts have had to, you know, discontinue in the past.
Trustee Schmidt?
Through the chair to Mr. Sandquist, obviously there's not enough time for this budget, but this number, when I look at the fact that we're putting more money into transportation than we are into education and instruction, that blows my mind that our priorities have become backwards. Because we should be putting more into the classrooms than we should be into transportation. Is there any way, once budget is done, we could do a deeper dive into this? Like, are we gonna need to go back to catchment busing again? Like, I guess we need to maybe start having some conversations, but obviously there's no time because we're in budget now. But do you think that we can maybe start that, say, September, and start taking a really big look at transportation and figuring out maybe we need a consultant to do it independently from the board? I don't know. But we're gonna need to do something to figure out why that's so high. Because when I look at instruction and I look at transportation, that doesn't work for me. And we know that within our policy, we know our priority learners won't be affected by any changes in busing because it's our priority learners. So I think maybe in September, we may have to take a look at that.
I think that's something a board initiates, and the next, or this board or the next board would have that opportunity. What I will say is these aren't new trends. I've gone back 5 years. These are our trends. This is the way the budget has been before this board. These are consistent over 5 years, over 3 years. I looked at it over that period of time. So we do have a lot of data already just on the dollar values, but it could suggest a deeper dive.
Can I do a follow-up? What does the ministry give us, through the chair to the secretary treasurer, what does the ministry give us for transportation?
It's not easily extracted unless you really understand the funding formula.
Is there a ballpark?
I have it. I would have to bring it up. I could do it at this meeting, but when I finish the presentation, if it's something you want to know, like there's 283,000. That's outward facing, and that what the boards receive, so you don't charge for transportation. Like, remember that a number of years ago? But deep in the formula, there's something called the disbursement index, and that funds a board based on how far away students live from their nearest school that that their catchment school is. So that, you know, the more you receive there, the more likelihood that you have to provide more transportation because your students are far away from their school they're going to attend. And then there's another factor that considers the rural nature of a district, which is whether you have gravel roads or maybe you have water crossing. And that is a really small one for Cowichan Valley, like really small. I think it's $6,000. So I know that when you put that all together, if I had the number in front of me, well, you have it on your sheet. If you look at what's currently being budgeted for transportation, subtract 1.3 million from that line item. I can show you here. Elizabeth has it. I don't have it in front of me.
2.366.
Yeah. So 3728, not 214. You see that number on the far right side here?
Number 7, transportation,
Yep,
towards the
number
bottom of
7,
the page.
3728, 214. It's 1.3 million less than that.
Okay, trustee Strachan and trustee Croft?
Yeah, for the increase of our land-based learning, outdoor ed, sports competitions, is that all covered under that transport budget as well?
A little piece of it is for land-based, where we have put in the fuel piece component of that.
Okay.
But there's been no, field trips would not be in there. Usually they're paid for by the school directly.
Thanks.
Trustee Croft?
This is an adjacent question. So there's also quite a variance between what we receive for priority learners and what we spend for priority learners, or there has been in the past.
I think are you talking about the targeted dollars for, we budget to spend it all, but it doesn't always happen. And there's a number of reasons. There's a lot of grants and things that are given out that aren't always fully spent in that department. It's targeted, so it has to roll over into the next year. And the IEC are starting to address that, that component of the budget. If I'm answering your question correctly. You're thinking about the Indigenous education target?
No, I'm thinking about that in previous years, we've talked about priority learners, special needs, EAs,
Oh, I'm
and that
sorry.
kind of thing. Sorry, yes.
Okay,
And
inclusive
we tend to spend-
education.
We tend to spend more than what we receive.
Sorry, I
That's okay.
interpreted it incorrectly. There is usually about a 50 to 60% overspend in that area. Mhm. Over the funding. Mhm. But it's not a spending model either. It's a funding model. Like boards have discretion to do that, and that is standard amongst probably every school district is quite a bit over, just the way the funding works. Mhm. Okay. So I knew this would be a discussion starter, and that's why it's in my presentation. There are things that the board has been doing over the course of the last few years, and that still sit in the budget. I just wanted to put that list back out here again. Those things have not been removed from the budget. I'm not going to go over them all. They're in your package. The next slides are really to provide you as a board with information of what is currently in the budget before any reductions are made. So this is a list of all of the various employee groups sorted by FTE, full-time equivalent. So full-time equivalent for a teacher is is a full teacher load. For an education assistant, it's 7 hours, but most work 5.5, so that 149 FTE is probably closer to 190 positions when you do the math. It's the same. Not every noon hour supervisor. Those are 1 hour employees. So there aren't 8 of them. There's 8 that probably times 8. So just for example, so we have 842.544 FTE in the operating budget. And then these are the various other areas that bring the board to a total operating expenditure starting place of 109,978,495. And you should see that number on the far left-hand column down at the bottom of your big sheet, if you're following along. On the left-hand side. It's probably buried under the papers that are there. So go to the bottom. You see it there. Okay, so I'm just going to, so that is everything that is in that number is on those 2 sheets. So we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting shortfall. So that exists when expenditures exceed revenues. And that's the position that the board always starts a budget in. Like there's 2005. Maybe the only year that the government boosted funding, and that is 20 plus years ago, where the boards came in and actually went, well, what can we add to the budget because funding was increased. So it hasn't happened in over 20 years. So you always are starting with how do we manage the pressures that have come. So there's ways to balance. You can utilize prior year surplus, and I expect to see the board do that. You can reduce your expenditures. That's also part of this budget proposal, and you can increase your revenues. There were a lot of requests that came in through the consultation, and that is really difficult to accommodate in the 3rd year of enrollment decline. The board is in funding protection, and we'll be looking at ways to maintain a staffing contingency because of that. So as we showed you in the preliminary operating grant calculation, the board are receiving $681,000 in funding protection. So if the enrollment isn't going to drop 165 FTE and it drops less, some of those students that come back first pay that back, if you understand, until you break over that 98.5% of the prior September's funding threshold, and then you start to generate money again. So that happened this year. We started last year's budget in almost $800,000 of funding protection, and then the inclusive ed numbers increased a lot as it did across the province and brought the budget up, but not significantly enough to pay for all the necessary services. So you have to make sure there's contingency built into your staffing allocations. If that makes sense. Got to hold back. So these are the percentages that are currently of the staff that are in the budget. 90.5% of the budget is wages and benefits at this moment. That number will go down a bit as we go through the presentations, but just wanted to just kind of see it in a big pie where all the money goes in the operating budget. So there it is, broken out. I'm not going to go through them all. They're here for information. So you should have all these papers on your desktop, and I'm going to start by walking through note 1. So we've shown the board possible surplus allocation of 1.3 million this year, which would be added to the 4.3 million that was left over after the 25-26 operating budget was adopted, or annual budget was adopted. So if the board were to take 2.5%, 2.5 million, you would still have 2.84% left in surplus contingency. So you can see on the sheet as you move that up what the percentages are, or if you were to move that down what the percentages are. So I've highlighted it for you to see what that is on your sheet. The next item is in relation to international student program revenues. This is an area that the last couple of years have exceeded budget expectations. So just suggesting truing the budget up to align with the last couple of years' experience on revenue. So seems like a safe revenue increase. So those are really the only two things that we're recommending here. There aren't any big swings in interest rates or anything that are going to help on investment income. And really outside of that, there's a little bit of rental income in the budget and a lot of opportunities to really generate funding. And that would take the board to 1.7 million in shortfall. So that eliminated over half quite quickly. Options as we follow through here. So this doesn't actually affect any staff on the ground, but you might recall that this year, and I think we have more opportunity to really look at the non-enrolling ratios in the operating budget and make adjustments that would have been needed to have been made in the absence of the costume enhancement fund. So this is a complex one to fully describe. But to simplify it, if the board could normally afford 7 librarians and the costume enhancement fund said that you must have 10 on restored language, we would claim 3 from the ministry. If the board can only afford 6 librarians now and the ministry still requires that there be 10 on the restored language, then the other 4 need to go into the ministry pot. So we're talking about a little bit of a movement here, but there's still 10 librarians at the end of the day, if that makes sense to everybody. I don't think there's too many more opportunities to address those non-enrolling ratios in the operating budget, but I think this is one that we need to do again this year. Next one, with declining enrollment. You'll see details of this in your package. There's a small clerical adjustment, and I'll review this with our guest soon. As well, there's a small clerical adjustment as well that would be replaced with a bank of time to be drawn on from casuals or temporary assignments. So that's in your note as well. I don't want to speak about too much here in the public realm. There's also a retirement pending, and that would see not the full savings of that retirement, but you've had the discussion on this item before. Again, this is an individual, so I don't want to speak about it in a public realm, but you have the details for that in front of you, and you're aware of this from previous conversations. Now this one we can talk about a little more. With fewer classrooms due to declining enrollment, there's an opportunity to close some of those and have a minor custodial savings. It would probably equate to about 0.6 FTE or around 5 hours a day over the whole system. Employee replacement costs. So this one, as I've noted in my note, is always a bit of a gamble. So this was one of the budgets that saw a significant increased pressure post-COVID. In the early years following COVID, nobody wanted to see anybody who had a sniffly nose in the office, or nobody wanted to hear a cough. Like, there was a different culture around stay home, don't come to work. If you have anything, and you were called out on that by your colleagues. And I think, we've returned back to more regular levels of absenteeism. And I don't want to say that it was inflated because of COVID, but we're kind of back to those pre-COVID levels, where the budget is currently projecting, as I showed you, about 450,000 under budget. So the expenditures for this year, they're down a lot. And, it's always a gamble, but to take a third of that, I think is something important to consider. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. The next one, this one might, we looked at this, this one might surprise you a bit. The FTE at secondary over the last 3 years has dropped by 144 FTE from September 30th, first semester, to second semester. And part of that is kids graduate. They've gone back just for the one semester. Kids may withdraw, students may withdraw all entirely, or students may withdraw from courses as they have met their graduation requirements and are looking for, not a full course load. But we have staffed on those September 30th numbers and had 144 fewer students in February. So we know that it's not possible to make these adjustments at the two small secondary schools like Lake Cowichan and Chemainus. There wouldn't be any ability to hold back staffing for second semester from them because of the scale. But at Cowichan and Kelsey, I think there is the opportunity to hold back staffing in second semester. It's about a $450,000 total cost that the board incurs with the student drop. And so we think there's an opportunity here, and we're suggesting that that's an area to pursue. It will mean there won't be maybe as many opportunities in the second semester where they were able to put that staff into other options, and it will mean that the classes won't be smaller in the second semester like they have been. Okay. The next one is a position of a coordinator. You'll see in your note why this is being suggested. There'll be a vacancy, and the suggestion is just not to fill that vacancy. And I'm getting near the end. Average teacher salary adjustment. So I always have this item here, and I could do it right up front, but we take everybody that exists today and we roll them into next year. And we add all the increments, everybody moving up the bands. But every year, people retire who are at our most highest pay band and are replaced either with less expensive people, or that drop brings the average teacher salary down. So we realize these savings of approximately $200,000 every year. Somebody may go on leave with an illness and be replaced by a less expensive teacher, or somebody may retire early. So there's an opportunity there, like every year, to adjust that number, and we're suggesting that be an option as well. So that adds up to 1.515 million. As reduction options, which leaves the shortfall currently at 198,949. We've done a little more work since this presentation came out, and I'll just speak of another option that will be on your sheet next time. It's difficult for us to pinpoint how many weeks our staff will work who aren't 12-month employees. And what I'll mean by that, we'll say a bus driver is 10 months, but they're 10 months plus whatever vacation days they have that they haven't taken during the school year. So their 10 months expands if they take holidays in the summer and as part of the pay. So we budget on weeks. So this is all a formula-based system. We look at how many weeks we're paying people 4 times the rate. And we have been generating surpluses on the custodians and drivers. So there's no effect to an employee, but we believe we budgeted potentially 1 week over on those employees and could make that reduction. It will reduce the surplus in future years. But we think we can get closer to what the real expenditure are by dropping that week. There's also, and the school year fluctuates too. So I wouldn't want to go too far on that, knowing also that next year is a short year, because you'd just be looking for that again the next year when it expands back out. But that is $103,000, which starts to get down into the less than $100,000 shortfall. So getting close. Getting close. Are there questions on these?
Trustee Schmidt?
Just a few questions, Mr. Sandquist. So are you looking for recommendations today? Or is this just an information day?
Well, I think the board can give us discussion on any one of these items. If there's anything that's a no-go, we'll have to know that and take that off the list. Otherwise, something similar to this will come back at the next BEBC meeting, where we will be looking for recommendations to move the budget forward.
Okay, because when I look at this 198, and I look at where that would take us in our surplus, but it sounds like you probably can find that 198 anyway, but and we know that we're budgeting in a surplus right now, and that surplus may still grow. Could we not just cover that 198 with surplus and make this budget balanced? And then still do that other work?
The board could, and that could be direction that we're given to bring back to the next BEBC meeting. I've given you another suggestion of 103,000 that's not on here. So you would be looking at another $95,000 of the surplus, or 2.595.
Okay. Mr. Sandquist? Oops, go ahead. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna go. You want me to second it? Or you can second it?
No, I was just gonna.
Yep, no, go ahead.
Yeah, there was another, so when you started going over the expenditure reduction options, you made a comment, you said, maybe I wrote it down wrong, that these options do not impact on the staff on the ground. Did I take that correctly?
That may have been only the very first one.
Okay.
That is the non-enrolling ratios. That does not impact staff on the ground, but the other ones absolutely do.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that, because
Yeah.
holistically, I felt like that was an incorrect
Oh,
statement.
yeah, you would be correct, that would be an incorrect statement. It was
Yeah.
intended to represent the non-enrolling ratios piece.
Okay, and then a follow-up to that, looking at the custodial and drivers, mindful the drivers have a bit of a different role, but the custodials do a lot of cleanup work at the end of the season, at the beginning of the season, knowing a lot of them. They work hard and the place needs the cleaning. So are you suggesting you would drop one of those weeks, leaving them with maybe more work?
No, it's the exact same work, but we think we've over budgeted for it.
Okay,
So the way our formulas work is, we budget on number of weeks. It's a table-driven system that we use. So what we're saying is we have guessed on how many weeks. We've made an estimate on how many weeks. And we have a lot of new staff. So an experienced staff member might get 6 weeks vacation, and a new staff member might get 3 weeks vacation. So we were trying to average that out and figure out, well, how many weeks are we actually paying for in a year? Because realizing also that some people take that vacation during the school year. Some people might hold it all and use it at spring break, winter break, and the summertime. And then you are paying for a greater duration than if somebody takes it in the school year. So what we think is that, I had Carrie help me, and we looked at what if we take a week off, and we're still well within the projected salary numbers that we have this year for those groups. So it doesn't change any of the actual service delivery. We think we've just over budgeted. So what that means is if we make that change, next year won't generate a surplus in that account like it has been.
okay, that's helpful.
Trustee Souza?
Thank you. So I'm just looking at the coordinator position here in note 10. So the idea here is not to replace the inclusive education coordinator, one of the three, not be replaced. And what are the implications of that?
I would have to ask one of our education team to answer that.
If I could look to Assistant Superintendent Reynolds.
Through the chair.
With the realignment of our services with the one assistant soup and 3 directors, they're going to be responding to schools' needs in a different way, likely more efficient. So we think we'll be able to manage that work and that alignment as opposed to having so many coordinators.
So a follow-up, so would that, trying to tease that apart a little bit, does that mean potentially more work on the 2 remaining coordinators?
Through the chair. We don't believe so. We just, every year that we try to look at how we're supporting our system and our learners. And so the last couple of years, we've cobbled together an extra position. With the realignment, we feel that we can continue to maintain the support without that position in place.
Okay, thank you.
I need a recap on the 103,000. Are we looking at 198 or are we looking at 95?
We did this work late yesterday.
Okay.
As on the weekend, I dug deep into why we've been surplusing in USW wages every year, year over year, and I understood why it was occurring in the trades line. They're 12-month employees, but we've had a few individuals who have been off and they don't have casuals. We needed to look at why has it been occurring in the custodial and driver line. Like your surplus projection has about $250,000 from USW wages right now. So we looked at what if we dropped it a week in our calculation and found about 70,000 in the custodial line and about 30,000 in the driver line. And even with those reductions, we're still surplusing on those budgets. So we're not. We have one too many weeks in our budget is what I'm suggesting. And so with that would be another $103,000 off of that number and would bring it closer to $95,000 shortfall. It's going to reduce that by that amount.
Thank you.
Carry on.
I'm not sure if I'm to be bringing back at the next meeting a budget with $95,000 additional surplus for the board to have, further presentation on.
Yes.
Okay. I don't mean that. I'll take that as direction, but I don't need that in a motion. It'll come back. Okay. Well, I'm going to keep moving. Thank you. It's warm in here, so I hope you can all stay awake. So just a couple things, the 25-26, there were some slight changes to the mental health supports that the board had adopted. That the level that is in this year's budget has rolled over. I just wanted the board to be aware of that, as well as the assessments and the additional inclusive ed supports that were also in the 25-26 budget. So I think that's just important because I know those were priorities for the board. On the surplus, you saw this on your attachment sheet, but for the presentation that's come out publicly, this is just a reconciliation. If 2.5 is drawn, or whether that's 2.595, that changes that a little bit. And we'll do another surplus projection probably this week or this weekend to get that number really nailed down. We'll have another month of data to really help us understand the year-end expectations. But with 2.5 million, this is just to illustrate that there's 3.1 left, and that's 2.84%, and that fits within your 1 to 3% contingency policy. So at the higher end. So just it seems like it's falls within your policy. So you were aware of that. And then looking at surplus history, hard to see on the screen, probably easier to see in your package. The blue bar is what's been drawn down over various years from surplus. So it grew during COVID, and it's starting to come back down again. So if you look at the orange number, it's starting to come back down again. So we've kind of are digging into those COVID surpluses that the board achieved, and we'll see less and less likely available surplus in future years. That's what I'm trying to illustrate here. Okay, so there's always risk in a budget. Example I use year to year is we never know how cold it's going to be. We never know if it's going to snow a ton. We never know if there's going to be a lot of illnesses. We never know if there's going to be wars waged that increase gas prices. Like, we don't know these things, and there's always risk in a budget. That's why you have contingency in the event that those are way off. But we also know that if we're overly conservative in our budget, then we're not putting enough service, the dollars aren't going to support kids. So that's a balance that I hope you understand as we go through the budget. So something like taking $150,000 from the absenteeism. We're okay this year because it's $450,000 under. We don't know what next year's going to look like, but it seems like that's a risk. But if you left it at 450, you're cutting 150 from somewhere else. What does that do to the system? So just know that it's always a balancing game. And now I'll quickly go through the special purpose funds. So we just want to look at two of them, Costume Enhancement Fund overhead and Community Link. They're the same year over year at this point. So what we're going to be bringing you forward is just some adjustments for some of the inflationary costs that are in there. Costume Enhancement Fund is part of the Restored Teacher Collective Agreement language from the fall of 2016. We start off with the exact same dollar amount for teachers. We don't know what it will be. The board receives what's actually filed based on the September 30th submission. But the wage increases are nowhere in this budget yet, and we know all these numbers are going to change. Overhead is $1,428,000, exactly the same as it is this year. And what overhead is it's to cover incremental costs for implementation of the collective agreement. So we look at that year to year, and it's really minor change. We just see some inflationary cost pressures on the wage side, but otherwise we've left the budget essentially as it is now. A little bit less education assistance that can be supported through it. 0.1 of an FTE. And then for Community Link, again, same dollars, it will change. This fund has been surplusing a little bit year over year. Used to be really focused on food services and with Feeding Futures and the federal national food program grants. It's been able to spend a lot more resources on student supports. And so, again, it just has basic inflationary pressures in it. And we see a little bit of a change on the EAs and student support worker allocations there. But that could all change when we get the inflationary component that comes for wages. Okay. Learning Improvement Fund, Adam and I from CUPE, we meet every year and we review how best to allocate those funds. So they are FTE based, so that's a slight drop from the current year, but not significant. What is up is the annual facilities grant. That's up close to $300,000 year over year. So that's a good news one. That's actually one of the areas where the budget is going to see a little bit more money to support buildings, windows, roofing, painting, accessibility. We don't typically see an increase when you're going down in enrollment, so we were aware that was coming, and that's good news. Feeding Futures is slightly down by about $10,000. That's due to declining enrollment. Again, it's enrollment-based funding. And the National School Food Program, that's a 5-year allocation. It's usually announced in the summer, but we'll budget based on the same amount as the current year for the purposes of creating the budget. We won't have that announced, but there's no reason to think it won't be the same.
Oh, Trustee Lisa.
Through the chair, is that also based on student enrollment, that number, or is that
I think so.
larger allocation?
I think it's we don't know the formula, but I'm going to guess it's there could be there's likely a community component that no matter it's probably not 100% enrollment or really small communities we get very, very little. If you're a school district with 300 kids, there's going to be a base and then there's going to be a per pupil component on top of that when I look at the formula. Okay, so thank you for staying with me. We're nearing the end. So the board are considering priorities, and next time we're back, we'll have alignment to strategic plan. There'll be additional feedback. I expect that the board will go to the advisory committee next week and have some conversations around these options as well. So there'll be one more point of input for the partners, and there'll be a special, assuming, depends where we're at on April 28th, but there's also the opportunity for an April 30th special BEBC meeting that's been held in your calendars. What I'm not sure, when I did this, bargaining hadn't been completed with CUPE. We now know that's not the case, that it is complete, but not unratified. I think, we'll get a budget that's balanced on April 30th with what we know, what the board knows. But I don't expect there'll be an adoption of that budget until later on, because there's going to be the funding that's going to come in, and there's going to be the need to build those wages, and that's not going to be a perfect match because it's not funded on the actual cost. So it's going to be up or it's going to be down, and that may have an effect on your surplus depending on how different those numbers are, funding versus actuals. So I expect that the uniqueness of this year is that the board will have a balanced budget on the end of April, and staffing will proceed, and there'll be a motion to proceed with staffing based on that budget. And we'll have to wait for a little more information before the final adoption. It's not actually due to the ministry until June 30th. And this happened one of the last rounds where it was delayed as well. We had to delay the budget. So I expect that that'll be the process that we'll go through. But staffing will start on May 1st based on the balanced budget that's been presented. And that's all I had today.
Any questions? No.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, just to say thank you once again for just making this so clear. And always appreciative. I don't know how else to say it. I'll say the same thing as every time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. You always make this easy and very clear. And being that there's no other business, we have a motion to adjourn. Trustee Souza, Trustee Thorne, all in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lisa.